Christians, continuing on to part 11 of my series called Make Egypt Great Again. I'm in Exodus chapter 1, and I come now to verses 15 and 16. Up to this point, I shall briefly remind you that we have this new king who is over Egypt that Joseph did not know. Or I should say, who did not know Joseph. This was a man of a different agenda that was contrary to Joseph and the previous Pharaoh that preceded this Pharaoh. So this guy comes in, and he is what we might refer to in modern times as a disruptor. He has a different agenda altogether. And his goal is to make Egypt great again. And his biggest fear was that the numbers of the people of Israel were growing so large, he convinced his people that if they kept growing, they would eventually overtake the Egyptians, and then as a result, either side with their enemies or take over the country itself. This is what was happening. And this should sound familiar to a lot of people. But it's important to understand that if we read the scriptures and don't understand what we're reading, it's going to be hard for us to equate what we're reading with things we experience in our own lives. This king decided that oppression on a grand scale would be the solution to his problem, which is to stifle the progress of the Israelites, to stifle their energy, to break their will, to humiliate them, to reduce them to subjugate them to what is nothing less or short of being in bondage or in servitude to the state. They were not slaves to individuals, but the Pharaoh, this new king, hired Egyptians and told them to increase the tax burden on the Israelites and to increase their burdens, of which and upon which they would pay higher and an exorbitant tribute of taxes. But we discover that in verse 12 of Exodus chapter 1, it says, "But the more that the Egyptians afflicted the people of Israel, the more they multiplied and grew." And this should be a lesson for us today. Wherever you see active oppression and the rigors of burdens that are unnecessary, that are bred out of an unfounded, hypothesized fear, know this, that oppression will never get the end to which it was put in place to effect. In his attempt to stifle the growth of the Israelites, the Bible tells us that the more that the Egyptians inflicted these burdens upon them, the more they grew. And so, like a true tyrant, instead of seeing the handwriting on the wall that the policy that is put in place is not working, he decides to double down and to increase the rigor, thinking that that's going to make it shut down the advancement and the growth of Israel. But what he would find out is that doubling down would only double up the increase of the Israeli expansion. So, when doubling down on the rigors imposed upon them failed, then he took up a new tactic that gave him room to introduce a whole new level of cruelty to the Israelites. And what does he do? In verse 15 of Exodus 1, chapter 1, it says that the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the other one's name was Puah. And he said unto them, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and you see them on their birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. So first off, what he wanted to do was to get these Israelite midwife women to go contrary to their own interests, to the point of offing, slaying their own children, the children of flesh and blood. Now, these two midwives are most likely the head nurses, because there's no way that these two could be the midwives of such a vast number of people. But they were obviously put in a position, they obviously had a position of leadership overseeing the birth of the children of Israel. The midwives, what their job is to bring forth, to cause to bring forth is what a midwife is. And their job is to oversee the births of these children to the Israelite women. So Pharaoh's plan was, let me bring in these two Hebrew women, and their names, by the way, are Hebrew, contrary to Josephus, who would lead you to believe that these midwives were Egyptian women. But that is simply not true. It was Hebrew women, as it is clearly indicated in the scriptures. But Pharaoh decided, let me go to the Hebrew midwives and get them to slay the men or the boys who would be born to these Israelite women. He was hell-bent, for lack of a better expression, on stopping the perpetuation and growth of the nation of Israel. And so he tells them that when a boy is born, to slay them. And then he says, and when you do the duties of the midwife for the Hebrew women, when you see this son being born, kill them. So now, in addition to trying to getting these Hebrew women to turn against their own people, he sought to get two Israelite women in charge of bringing births, healthy births, facilitating healthy births. He then decides that all the boys should perish. They should be slain. And this way, he is authorizing genocide of the male sons born to the Israelite women. And he is trying to get that to take place at the hands of these two Israelite women. Unbelievable. But what is not unbelievable is that it is not uncommon in these situations, in countries and in governments, where an oppressing government will bring in willing people from among the oppressors to come and help them oppress their own people. This is what is happening here with this king. He wants to get the Hebrew women where it would be a subtle form or a subtle approach toward reaching his goal if he can get them to play ball. We see in we see in Exodus chapter 5, verse 14, where it says that the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick, both yesterday and today as before? When the officers of the children of Israel came and cried to Pharaoh, they said, why are you dealing with your servants this way? So we see here that even amongst the taskmasters, Pharaoh had hired Israelites to assist them at the Egyptians, that is, at oppressing their own people.